happening around you. Hear about state events, businesses, and from the people behind them on the Megacast, an hour-long TV, radio, and streaming show keeping you informed on the day-to-day news. Listen in on talks with volunteer groups, documentarians, and financial advisors, Monday to Friday with your host, Tyler Kieft. Catch the Megacast weekdays from 10 a.m. to 11 on Civic Center TV, 89.3 Lakes FM, and streaming on MyMyTV.com. You're watching and listening to your home for Greater West Bloomfield News. Civic Center TV and 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake, West Bloomfield, Kego Harbor, Sylvan Lake, 89.3 Lakes FM. It's the Megacast, an hour-long TV and radio streaming show keeping you informed on the day-to-day news. Live from West Bloomfield, we're bringing you the news, updates, and information impacting communities around Michigan. Join our host, Tyler Kieft, as he talks with community members, business leaders, and professional experts about the stories that impact you. You're watching the Megacast on Civic Center TV. Like what you see? Beautiful works of art, masterworks of metal, and accomplishments of artistry will be on display near you. All kinds of artists from all walks of life come together to celebrate their skill and appreciate their work's beauty. Hot Works presents the 2023 Orchard Lake Fine Art Show. Stop by July 29th and 30th between 2 and 10 p.m. between Powers and Daly off of Orchard Lake Road.
When the temperatures are chilly, being together warms the soul. Keep the winter fun going. Help protect yourself and those around you by keeping your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
1 in 4 Michigan homes has high levels of radon, a naturally occurring radioactive gas known to cause lung cancer. It doesn't matter where you live or what type of home you have. You won't even know it's there unless you test. So don't wait. Testing is cheap and easy. And if there's a problem, it's simple to fix. Visit michigan.gov/radon to learn more.
We took action. Will you?
You're listening to your radio homes for the Megacast, 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. Today's edition of the Megacast begins now. Welcome to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Today we'll be talking to a number of people about topics of interest and importance to Michiganders just like you. Let's begin with what's making headlines today on our local news page on civiccentertv.com. Our top story comes from Clara Hendrickson at the Detroit Free Press. Yesterday, Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed into law expansions on the 1976 Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act that banned discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. A major win for the LGBTQIA+ community as well as advocates. This is all in addition to previous legislation in this term that expanded bans on discrimination for these individuals in housing, education, employment, and more. Senator Jeremy Moss, a Democrat from Southfield and the senator that introduced this bill, called the finality of the legislation being signed into law, quote, so long overdue, and closed quote, as well as, quote, too many, and said too many had suffered on the journey to get here, and closed quote. Codifying these protections was not just a move by Democrats in order to protect the LGBTQIA+ community and individuals within it, but also to protect them from future court rulings that could have potentially set legal precedents regarding discrimination based on the basis of sexuality and gender. Said the state's Attorney General Dana Nessel, this is a good move morally for the state, but also will bolster the state's economy, stating, quote, protecting these freedoms is the right thing to do, and it's just, sorry, my prompter's having some issues there. Protecting these freedoms is the right thing to do, and it's just good economics. States with extreme laws are losing talent and investment because, you know what? Bigotry is bad for business, end closed quote. Also making headlines today on our local news page from Jennifer Chambers at the Detroit News. New reports are showing some modifications in previous timelines from the day of the Oxford High School shooting in November of 2021, which was obtained by the Detroit News this week via a media request. The report shows that the then 15-year-old who perpetrated these murders spent 9 minutes firing on his classmates and teachers, discharging the firearm both in the hallways as well as in the bathroom. These are among the first details of the timeline of the shooting to be obtained by the public or the press, despite calls for release of this information for over a year from families of the victims of the shooting that took the lives of 4 students at Oxford High School, those being Hannah St. Juliana at 14, Tate Meir, 16 years old, as well as both Madison Baldwin and Justin Schilling, who were 17 at the time. For reference, the timeline of the shooting at Michigan State University was recently released with not even a month surpassed between the event itself and the output of said information. Now, part of the problem is there are ongoing investigations related to the Oxford High School shooting, whether it be the ongoing trial related to the shooter himself, who has pled guilty to crimes he's been accused of due to that incident, as well as the investigation and the ongoing trial related to his parents, James and Jennifer Crumbly. And so with legal proceedings going on, with investigations going on, some of that information is being kept close to the chest of the prosecutors, of the defense, for the purpose of moving forward those investigations and their cases being made. One, in the case of the prosecutors, that these individuals should be held accountable for these situations and are guilty as charged, and in the case of the defense, saying that no, they are not guilty in these cases, and here is why. That information is critical, and that getting out in the public could sway theoretical juries one way or the other. So because these are legal proceedings, you have to be extra careful with a lot of this information so as to not taint the potential pool of jurors and put into question the sanctity of that jury and the objectivity of that jury should it come to that decision, should this be a trial by jury elected by those that are accused as well as the prosecutors. Usually it is, but regardless, you want to make sure that you're not potentially having this be tried in the court of public opinion on top of a court of law. And that's where the concern comes in with a lot of this information being released, and that's why so much of it hasn't been released. Now, complaints about a lack of release of the timeline and other critical information related to that day in November of 2021 have drawn a puzzled response from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Michael Bouchard, who said that a full timeline was made available and was consistently being updated as new information came in and old information was either outdated or was being corrected or retracted altogether immediately following the shooting. Said Sheriff Bouchard, quote, "The timeline is available and has been from the very beginning," end closed quote. But that's not what parents like Megan Gregory, whose son was also confronted alongside one of the deceased in the bathroom by the shooter, quote, "If there was one released and published, it was missed. None of us has it," end closed quote. So again, a very tough spot to be in for investigators, because on the one hand, the public absolutely deserves answers, and the public, especially in Oxford and in that community around the schools, wants answers, wants information. They want to be able to put together the timeline that took place on November 30th of 2021, figure out what exactly happened to their kids, certainly to those who were confronted by the shooter directly, and especially in the cases of those that were injured and killed. What happened that day? What led up to it? How did this all go down? And then that's going to inform discussions within that community about what to do in the future, policy-wise, protocol-wise, to prevent that kind of bloodshed in a school from happening ever again in Oxford, and hopefully even help beyond that to prevent school shootings from either A, happening altogether, or B, from ending up having such severe outcomes as they did at Oxford High School, where 4 students were killed, where several others were hospitalized, where a teacher was also, a staff member was also hospitalized in the result of that shooting. What can be done, what was done, and what ultimately led to this being such a deadly shooting just over 15 months ago at Oxford High School. That's all valid questions. That's all valid questions that deserve answers for the public as they are requesting, as they want, and as they should have. However, as was mentioned, these are ongoing investigations as well. And so some of that information needs to be kept out of the eye of the public, at least for the time being, while those investigations are ongoing, while that information is being collected, while the prosecutor's office is organizing that information in a way that can coherently tell a story and set a narrative and give an explanation for what happened in the cases of James and Jennifer Crumbly. Were they or were they not instigators in this? Were they or were they not negligible in the raising of their child, of their teenage child, who then ended up killing 4 of his classmates and injuring several others and traumatizing an entire community? How responsible are they? What about among this information can point to that being yes or no in those cases? That's important for prosecutors to know, for the defense to know, and for the jury to ultimately hear before the public does, so that these cases can be thoroughly investigated, thoroughly tried, and we can ensure that the court system and the legal system works as is directed. It must be thorough and by the book in order to bring those responsible to justice, and that's what makes this so tough for all that are involved, from the investigators to the law enforcement prosecutors, and certainly even for the public, who really just wants to have information so they can try as best as is humanly possible to understand why this happened. Finally, making news today on our local news page on civiccentertv.com, this time from MLive's Samuel Dodge. As news earlier this week about tuition-free education options at Wayne State University were announced, the Princeton Review also released its college rankings and analysis and says in Michigan, the best value for the price of higher education comes at 2 universities, at least on the public side, the University of Michigan and Michigan Technical University, or Michigan Tech. U of M ranked number 9 in the nation amongst public universities, with Michigan Tech also in the mid-top 50s, coming in at 32. Among the reasons for the University of Michigan being the state's best college option, per the Princeton Review, U of M's Go Blue Guarantee, which offers free tuition or tuition support to eligible students across its Ann Arbor, Dearborn, and Flint campuses. Students are eligible for free tuition at the Ann Arbor campus if they come from families whose annual income is $65,000 or less. And there are also some protections and some funding options that are in place for those families who are bringing in more than $65,000 per year to help financially with paying for a college education. Also high atop the scales in terms of value, Kalamazoo College, which came in ranked at number 18 overall in terms of, quote, best schools for making an impact. And that list, of course, lists private colleges which rank community, sustainability, and other engagement efforts in order to put together these rankings. So really the moral of the story here is the state of Michigan has many incredible educational institutions in higher education, both on the public and on the private side, with many of them coming ranked in the top 20, top 50 in the entire nation, including Kalamazoo College on the private side, the University of Michigan, Michigan Tech on the public side, and we have great other public universities that have excellent programs in their own right. We mentioned Wayne State University. Michigan State University is one of the top, if not the top school for educators, for future educators in the entire country, and that's huge, especially right now, as we know that there is still a bit of a teacher shortage across Michigan and around the U.S. They're getting great training right here in the state of Michigan. And theoretically, if people are coming into Michigan to learn to be teachers at Michigan State or at Michigan or at other colleges and universities, perhaps they're going to intern in the state of Michigan. They're going to fall in love with the state of Michigan and go after those teaching jobs that are available right here in the Great Lakes state. So there's great colleges in education, there's great colleges in business and in the arts, and so many amazing programs across these universities and these colleges in all regions of the state of Michigan. So, I mean, this really just tells you can't go wrong with higher education here in the state. And it also kind of goes back to these efforts being made from the state of Michigan, from Oakland County, from universities individually to make college education, to make higher education more affordable for those that do pursue it. Whether you go to a college or a 4-year college or university, you go to a community college, get an associate's degree, a 2-year degree, or you're going into a skilled trade and looking to get a certification or set of certifications, there are so many more programs that have been put in place in order to help make your way into doing that, from those at the state level that are really emphasizing helping people get to a point where a large number of those in the state of Michigan by 2030 either have a post-secondary degree, a college degree, or are able to obtain a skilled trade certification, and show that they're in a trade or in another profession where they're highly qualified, highly certified, and are able to make really great careers for themselves and start businesses, ideally right here in the state of Michigan. You look at these colleges individually, they're starting to put options out there to make college more affordable for some of the students that are in the most adverse positions possible, coming in with in lower income families and lower tax bracket families that, in the past, in the recent past especially, with the cost of college and university education being what it is, may not have had those opportunities at all had it not been for things like the Go Blue Guarantee or the Wayne Guarantee that was announced earlier on this week, that helps those families in that $60,000 to $70,000 a year income range help their kids go to college, sometimes free of tuition, which then sets up those kids for upward mobility using their college degree in order to uplift that next generation in their family beyond where they were in the current generation. That's what the point of education is. It's to make our workforce more skilled, build the economy, build people's lives, improve people's lives, and we're seeing that being rewarded as the Princeton Review, which reviews colleges and universities and educational institutions all across the state of Michigan, around the U.S., has put 2 universities here in the state of Michigan in its top 50 for public schools, Michigan at number 9 and Michigan Tech at number 32, and is highly ranking our private schools like Kalamazoo College in the top 20 at number 18 itself as well. So really good news from the Princeton Review, and a nice report there from Samuel Dodge at MLive. You can view this report and other stories making headlines today and throughout the entirety of this week on our website on civiccentertv.com. Just click on our local news page, and you'll have updates there each and every day throughout the week. We update those every single day before our live shows during the week, and then we will clear those on Monday morning the next week over, so that you're starting fresh every week. These are the top stories from this particular week that you should be paying attention to. You can always view them, whether you're watching our Friday show or you're watching our Tuesday show, or you've missed most of the week. You're always going to, excuse me, got a frog in my throat. That time of the year again, they're coming out with allergy season, the frogs and the allergies all together. But you can find all those resources right there on our local news page on civiccentertv.com. In addition, at the top of the page, we have links to public health information. Of course, this show, ironically enough, as I was clearing my throat and got a little bit hoarse there, was built out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was originally about COVID-19 updates right here in the greater West Bloomfield area. Then we expanded out into parts of Oakland County and then across Oakland County and around the state of Michigan. And now we're back to where we are right now, giving information and talking about stories in the news all across the state of Michigan, with, of course, the focus being here in Oakland County. You can keep that focus on public health news and information regarding COVID-19, the seasonal flu, and other diseases or public health concerns that may arise over time from 3 resources: the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and locally from the Oakland County Health Division, right at the top of the page on our local news page, civiccentertv.com. Find all those headlines as well there. We have a great show ahead on this edition of the Megacast. Coming up next, bank failures, inflation, right to work. Oh my, we've got a big market and economy segment coming up next with Michael Greiner from Oakland University. Don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. This is the Megacast.
Let's relish these moments, made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. Keep the festivals going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
There are many different kinds of noses. Our noses can sniff out all kinds of things. Good things and bad things. Your nose knows. if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
Can I ask you a question? Why do you want to get the COVID-19 vaccine?
I don't like getting sick. The virus will die. It will be easy to not catch it. Keep my family safe and keep playing soccer. Because I love being vaccinated.
What's your hope for everyone?
I hope everybody gets the vaccine to keep safe and strong. Be like happy, having fun everywhere. Everyone stay safe and hope you get the vaccine.
I'm Steve Eiserman of the Detroit Red Wings, and I think every child in Michigan deserves a safe, healthy, and happy childhood. Can we build a state where Children Trust Michigan isn't just a name, but something our kids believe? Please support Children Trust Michigan as the voice for children and families by visiting the website to learn more.
Wondering what to say to someone who's been sexually assaulted or abused?
I believe you. I'm so sorry this happened.
It's not your fault.
Confidential and anonymous help is available at the Michigan Sexual Assault Hotline. Connect with us 24/7. Call 855-VOICES-4 or text 1-866-238-1454 for help. Learn more at michigan.gov/voices4.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. You can stay tuned with us and learn more about all of our partnering stations on our website, civiccentertv.com/Megacast, where you'll also find each one of our full episodes and every single segment on demand as well. civiccentertv.com/Megacast is the place to go for all of that. Well, it's been a big week in the news, particularly in the economy and in the markets with stories all across the U.S., including right here in Michigan, having a big impact on our markets and on our economy. And as always, to talk about that, we're joined by Oakland University's Dr. Michael Greiner from their School of Business Administration. Michael, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here, Tyler. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I see you've got your green on.
Yeah, I do. It's always in my heart with me being a Michigan State Spartan. So that's why I'm wearing green. And every time I take a break over here, some piece of equipment is somehow shocking or pinching me to remind me that I did not wear green on the St. Patrick's Day. But regardless, let's talk about the green in our economy. It's kind of been there and gone, left and right, as the weeks go on because of inflation in the country. But let's begin with what's been a really big story nationally, as a Silicon Valley Bank experienced a significant issue this week and really went into basically a failure, and that caused a big concern for a lot of consumers in the markets. Does this mean that my bank might be susceptible to failure? How could this affect those that were invested in that bank, that had their money in that bank? So give us the overview, of the Silicon Valley Bank situation and how that really is affecting the market.
Yeah, this is a crazy time right now. And I'll tell you, for those of us who were involved in managing the whole financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, it's kind of giving us some bad memories because basically what you're seeing now is the second largest bank failure in the history of the country. And the last time we had such a big bank failure was when Washington Mutual failed back in 2008. This is a big deal. And in addition to that, we also had the third largest bank failure in the history of the country in the case of Signature Bank. So something's definitely going on right now. And what's going... Go ahead.
No, please continue.
Okay, and basically what's going on right now is we have where the Fed has been increasing interest rates very quickly to address the crisis that we have with inflation. And as they've been doing that, though, the problem is a lot of these banks have a lot of their money invested in assets that are denominated with very low interest rates. So you have to remember, a bank, it's been described in some respects as like a confidence game, because what the bank does is it will take deposits from different depositors, and it will turn around and basically lend most of that money out. and they'll only keep a small portion of that money on hand that they can then give to depositors back as they need to withdraw money. So there has to be a certain amount of confidence in the depositors that the money sitting in that bank will be safe there, because literally the bank doesn't have the money on hand to pay back all the depositors if all of them were to show up at the doors of the bank one day wanting all their money back. So there's this expectation. It's kind of like those. It's kind of like those gyms that only expect that a certain percentage of people who actually are members are going to show up at any given time. Same thing with banks, basically. Well, what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, and just as an aside, this is kind of ironic. You'd think, given its name and where it's based, that this would be a bank that's heavily invested in very risky investments. The reality is that could be no further from the truth, because the reality is most of the risky investments out in Silicon Valley, there's plenty of venture capital to support. So instead, the place that this bank had invested the funds that were deposited with it were very safe investments. Things like treasuries, things like mortgages, the kinds of things that everybody thinks are very safe, long-term investments. But again, the problem is that these investments were essentially denominated at a low interest rate. I read that the average interest rate that of the investments that Silicon Valley Bank was invested in was at less than 2%. Well, that's not a problem when interest rates overall are close to zero. You know, there's still that spread there, as they call it, which is the difference between the interest rate you're charging for lending out the money and the interest rate essentially that you're having to give out to depositors. Well, all that changes, of course, as the Fed has increased the interest rates. Now interest rates are up to nearly 5%. And in fact, on the market as a whole, you see interest rates as high as 6%. All of a sudden, the value of those bonds and investments that Silicon Valley had put their money into suddenly becomes worth less as a result of the fact that now they're not paying as much interest as literally need to be paid out to be able to get access to money. Well, what happened is word about this mismatch, what we call a liquidity mismatch, got around Silicon Valley. And as we've all heard, it's kind of a small community of venture capitalists and investors. And they all started talking to each other and saying to each other, hey, you know, we better get our money out of there because Silicon Valley Bank is in trouble. Well, what that resulted in is what's called a run on the bank. And literally, if more people show up who want their money out of the bank than the bank has on hand, the bank is going to run out of money to give back to them, and they're going to have to close. You know, the classic example of that a lot of people remember is in the movie "It's a Wonderful Life," where George, you know, who manages a small bank, has to run around and get money from all his friends and relatives to basically make sure that he had enough money to give back to his depositors when the bank opened the next day. Well, unfortunately, when you're dealing with over $200 billion in assets, Silicon Valley Bank wasn't in a position to be able to go around to all their relatives and friends to get that kind of money. So the only place they can turn for that kind of money is, of course, the federal government. And so the federal government stepped in over the weekend and took over the bank and basically said that it's going to protect all the deposits. Now, this is really significant with this bank because you have to remember the deposits officially under the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, are only insured up to $250,000. So any money you put in above $250,000 is uninsured. Well, as it turns out, because of the fact that most of the depositors at this bank were these Silicon Valley high flyers and tech companies and that type of thing, and that they had things like their payroll invested there, and these venture capital firms had the money invested there that they were going to invest into potential, new businesses. As a result of that, a lot of these investments are higher than the $250,000 threshold. In fact, there's one depositor who I understand had deposited as much as $3.3 billion with a B, $3.3 billion in deposits into the bank. And that's just money that was sitting there. So obviously, Silicon Valley Bank didn't have that kind of money sitting around to be able to pay back these depositors when they wanted their money back. And these depositors got really nervous very quickly because they knew only a very, very small portion of the total amount of money that they had deposited with this bank was going to be insured by the Federal Reserve. So that's kind of what led to to this run on the bank and to Silicon Valley Bank essentially going broke. Now, the good news is that Silicon Valley Bank does have a lot of assets. Silicon Valley Bank is nowhere near broke. And as a result of that, the odds are that the federal government is going to be able to manage this process where they'll be able to basically pay back all the depositors with money that Silicon Valley Bank has invested in places. Because again, they had these safe investments that they'd park their money in. They just couldn't get access to it at the time that the depositors were demanding it. So that's kind of what the federal government is stepping in and doing. But the problem is Silicon Valley Bank isn't the only bank that has invested its funds into safe investments that make it hard to get access to on a short-term basis. One of those, of course, was Signature Bank, which we talked about. Well, Signature Bank went broke, but in their case, they actually were involved in some pretty risky investments. In particular, they were backing a lot of cryptocurrency firms. Well, of course, as problems have emerged in the crypto environment, people got nervous about that bank, and there's been kind of a run on the bank there, which has resulted in them going belly up. Another bank that came under pressure was First Republic. And they're a bank that's primarily located on the east and west coasts, and they're known as the banker to the very wealthy. Billionaires and millionaires are frequently bankers there. So again, they put a lot of money in there, and a lot of these deposits are above the level that is insured by the FDIC. So as soon as there's even the sense that there could be the slightest bit of concern that those funds would be lost, there's a run on the bank. People try to get their money out of it as quickly as possible. So that's kind of the concern that we see going on right now.
Yeah, and it has ripple effects too, because in this case, the federal government, as you said, stepping in to provide some assistance, particularly to those depositors, to those who have money in that bank and are trying to get some of that money out. And then before this bank ultimately does go belly up, which it looks like it very well might. But that also affects then the markets down the line, because these companies are investing and these venture capitalists are investing through this bank and sometimes in this bank and their investments. And with that being now out the door, or mostly out the door, that's going to affect those businesses down the line. So in terms of the federal government's concern on this, given there's already major economic concerns regarding inflation, could we expect to see, as we did in around 2008 during the housing crisis and those bank failures and before, that we could see government bailouts for the bank itself or even just for the depositors?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, that's, I think, the concern from what I've read that the president himself had a lot of issues with. He was obviously there back in 2008 and 2009 when the administration was dealing with the financial crisis back then. And so he has very strong memories of what they went through. And my sense is that he had real concerns about the possibility of setting up a bailout. He didn't really want to be in a position where the banks were doing better than they were prior to the financial crisis, which they essentially caused. And that really is something that kind of stuck in the craw of a lot of people, myself included, by the way. But that being said, the bailout that's being engineered for Silicon Valley Bank wiped out the investors in the bank itself. So people who were stockholders in the bank and people who were bondholders that the bank had issued, they all are getting wiped out entirely. It kind of sticks in your craw a little bit. You're right that some of the depositors, though, in this bank, some of whom really probably could have been a little more careful with their money by perhaps spreading the money around to multiple banks where they'd have ensured that their deposits would be protected up to the $250,000 level, but instead kind of put all their eggs in one basket, which is rule number one about investing. You never want to put all your eggs in one basket. Well, they did, and so the federal government felt the need to step in. Now, the part of the reason I think that the federal government felt the need to protect all these depositors' accounts, and they've said that they're protecting all of them, again, above and beyond just the $250,000, which is already guaranteed. And the reason why they're willing to do this is not because Silicon Valley Bank is so big. It's only the 16th largest bank in the country. And yes, it is a large bank, but it's nowhere near like what we saw in 2008 and 2009 when banks like JP Morgan Chase and Citibank and Bank of America were in trouble. When banks like that were in trouble, that they caused what we consider systemic risk, where literally if they fail, suddenly the whole economy freezes up because people can't access their money, as you kind of pointed to. Well, Silicon Valley Bank the thing that really, I think, tipped the scales in terms of helping them out here is the fact that so many of the people who deposit money with them are people who do business in Silicon Valley. They're the venture capitalists, they're these tech firms. And the concern was that if these deposits aren't fully protected, that the tech sector would kind of freeze up. And as we've talked about, in some prior episodes, the tech sector right now is under some pressure. They've been involved in doing some layoffs. Their earnings haven't been what they've been expecting. We just saw last week a big announcement. I think 10,000 more employees being laid off from Meta, which is Facebook's parent. So they're already an industry that's under some pressure. And so this is being compared more to the bailout, for example, of GM and Chrysler back in the 2008, 2009 era, as opposed to the bailout of the big banks back during that time. And I think the expectation is, though, that because the federal government stepped in so quickly and so strongly, that this will probably put an end to this kind of going elsewhere and affecting other banks, because it sent a strong indication to depositors across the country and around the world that the government's going to be there to backstop their deposits, so they don't need to worry about taking the money out. As long as they do that, these banks are going to be okay. Because again, it's not a question of the fact that they don't have enough money on hand to cover all the deposits. It's a fact that they don't have enough money on hand today to cover all the deposits. So that's kind of what the federal government has been stepping in and doing. And it's not just here, by the way, where this is an issue. This became an issue in Europe as well, where we saw the Credit Suisse, which is one of the two large Swiss banks. They ended up requiring a bailout from essentially the Swiss central bank. And I think got an infusion of about $50 billion from them to try to keep them above water. And again, though, this is something, though, about sending a message to the markets that deposits are going to be protected, so you don't need to worry about taking your money out of the bank quickly. And that is going to then be what protects these banks from runs on the bank. I mean, it's the reason that the FDIC was created in the first place back in the 1930s. So as a result of that, hopefully they're sending a strong message and people will kind of be able to calm down. The bigger issue, though, in terms of the economy, is going to be that now the Fed and the European Central Bank and some of these other central banks are looking at it and saying, hey, we've been raising interest rates very, very quickly to try to address this inflation issue. And now we've found ourselves where suddenly banks are getting in trouble as a result of that. Does this mean we need to slow down our rate increases? Well, we just got an answer to that yesterday from the European Central Bank, which actually said, no, we're going to continue to increase interest rates. They increased their interest rate up by another half percentage point. Next week, the Fed is meeting, and the expectation has been, given the fact that there have been some pretty strong numbers on the economy, that the Fed was going to increase the interest rates again by a half percentage point, basically increasing the speed that they've been increasing interest rates as opposed to what they'd been doing in the past. But now the question is, are they going to continue to do that? Because they, again, are going to kind of jeopardize the balance sheets of some of these banks. Now, we saw what happened in Europe, and obviously they continued to raise interest rates quickly. But you have to remember, in Europe, interest rates now are at 3%. Here in the United States, they're at 4.5%. In Europe also, the data seems to indicate that inflation is increasing, whereas here in America, inflation seems to be going down, not as quickly as we might like, but going down nonetheless. So it's going to be interesting to see the way that the Fed kind of threads the needle next week.
We're joined on today's program by Michael Greiner, an assistant professor of management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration, with us each and every week for our weekly market and economy segment on the Megacast. You can find more information on Oakland University programs at oakland.edu. And Michael, here in the state of Michigan on an economic level, the big story this week was the state passing legislation in the House regarding the so-called right-to-work law, repealing the right-to-work law that was enacted during the Snyder administration back in 2012. And this is a tough spot for lawmakers and for the working public to be in, because on the one hand, this repeal is meant to bolster the strength and the ability of unions to negotiate with employers about conditions, about certainly wages, especially in today's economy. But it also in some cases, removing right to work will affect those that are not union workers and those that believe in being able to manage their own employment on their own. And so let's begin with just what right to work actually is, what that meant for Michigan's economy when it was enacted in 2012, and why this is such a significant move by state Democrats this week.
Sure, definitely. Well, what right to work is, it's kind of one of those things that they've got a political name for it, which really doesn't describe what it really is. Because where it originated is what unions would do is that as they negotiated deals with employers, they'd include as one of the provisions in the contract a provision that required everybody who's an employee at that employer to be a member of the union and to pay union dues. And the theory for that is that the union is going to quite a bit of effort to be able to negotiate these deals with the employer. There are costs involved in that, both in terms of research and the staff to do the negotiating, and then staff to kind of manage the contracts once they're in place. And that if employees are getting the benefit of those negotiations, then they should have to pay into it. That's the theory behind it. Well, what happened is that led to a lot of strength for unions, because it's a source essentially of revenues for unions that then they could use to bolster their own strength, as well as also help them engage in organizing other employers. And that's something then that people who are opposed to unions didn't like. Well, the first step then to addressing this was so-called right to work legislation. And again, it's a little bit of a misnomer, because basically what this legislation says is that unions, when they negotiate these contracts that include those provisions that all employees need to be members of the union, that those provisions are no longer legally enforceable. So it basically says that these things that are fairly negotiated as part of a contract suddenly can no longer be enforced. And what the research has shown, and this is kind of interesting because the research has been quite equivocal. Part of the problem we're dealing with here is so much of the research is driven by political views, where we have on one side people who are opposed to unions claiming one thing, on the other side people who support unions claiming the other thing. And even when you try to be objective about it, it's hard to do that, because so much goes into how the economy is affected. Sometimes it's tough to isolate the one effect rather than another. And that's certainly the case here in Michigan, where, yes, the economy has grown in Michigan after right to work legislation was passed, but it was also passed shortly after we had the 2008-2009 recession, so the economy was growing anyway. So what percentage of that growth can be attributed to the fact that we had right-to-work legislation, and what percentage of that can be attributed to the fact that that the economy was growing anyway? Well, that's one of the challenges that researchers have been trying to address. There's been some interesting research done to try to resolve this issue, and what they've done is that they've looked at areas where you've got a state border with, on one side you've got a right-to-work state, on the other side you've got a non-right-to-work state, and on that border, you've got counties on one side of the border and counties on the other side of the border. And these counties, obviously, because they're neighboring counties, will have a lot in common, with the exception of the fact that they're basically in different states, and that they have these different legal regimes. So it helps isolate the effect then of right-to-work legislation. And what's really surprising about this research is, in fact, how little impact right-to-work has on the labor market. It does tend to hurt labor unions. I mean, that is pretty well established. Labor union membership tends to go down in counties where you have right-to-work legislation. It does have a slight, although small, still a slight effect on economic development. So you tend to have a little bit higher economic development, a little bit more economic activity in right-to-work states than in non-right-to-work states. But the effect is small. The big surprise to me, reviewing all the data, is that you really don't have much of an effect on wages. And that effect has been found repeatedly, where they've done study after study after study, and consistently they've found that wages really don't go up as a result of either right-to-work or non-right-to-work regimes. And that's kind of surprising, because of the fact that the research has also shown that union membership tends to be associated with higher wages. So you'd think where there's higher union membership, you'd have higher wages. And interestingly enough, the data just doesn't show that.
On the program with us is Michael Greiner from Oakland University School of Business Administration. He's with us each and every Friday for our weekly market and economy talk on the Megacast. Michael, before we let you go, anything else we should be keeping an eye on this week? We got about a minute left.
Yeah, I think this is that really the big issue is this bank issue. I mean, this is a huge issue right now. And actually, it's something that is going to affect us locally as well, because I just saw that, for example, Comerica Bank is having to go and try to raise funds to make sure that they have enough money available to protect their depositors. Now, I understand they're in good shape. They did have their stock value drop a little bit when word got out. But here we're talking, again, a major bank here in Michigan that is trying to deal with this interest rate issue, this liquidity mismatch. And it's really a challenge for all banks out there. Unfortunately, what we're dealing with these kind of mid-tier banks is that they're not big enough that they're carefully monitored by the Fed and by the FDIC, but they're also too big where, you know, if they fail, then they can cause some real economic hardship. So I think that this is going to be a major issue to watch. And then leading to that, then, of course, next week, the Fed's going to be meeting. So I'm sure next week we'll be talking about what happened at the Fed meeting when we get together to talk again.
Well, Michael, we appreciate you joining us, giving us some information, some background on some of these big stories making news right here in the state of Michigan and across the U.S. and, frankly, around the world this week.
Happy to be here. Have a great weekend.
You as well. You can always join Michael Greiner on the Megacast each Friday at 10:25 for a weekly market and economy talk, and always find it on demand as well. CivicCenterTV.com/Megacast. We'll take a very short break here on the Megacast, and on the other side, one of over 300 charities and nonprofits supported on the Share Detroit platform joins us. Stay tuned. This is the Megacast.
Like what you see? Beautiful works of art, masterworks of metal, and accomplishments of artistry will be on display near you. All kinds of artists from all walks of life come together to celebrate their skill and appreciate their work's beauty. Hot Works presents the 2023 Orchard Lake Fine Art Show. Stop by July 29th and 30th between 2 and 10 p.m. between Powers and Daly off of Orchard Lake Road.
Now that the vaccine is available for children 5 and up, why do you recommend it?
Kids are part of the community and they can spread COVID.
We're seeing both healthy children getting sick from the virus as well as children with underlying health conditions.
They can easily bring the virus home to other people that are vulnerable and make them sick as well.
This vaccine can change that and keep children safe.
It's essential that your children get vaccinated to protect them, to protect your families, and to protect those in the community around you.
In the face of COVID-19, staying healthy is important.
And now the same is true in the face of flu.
Influenza has the power to infect millions.
But it's easy to protect yourself, your family, and your community.
The flu vaccine is safe and effective. And with COVID-19 still around,
it's essential. Together we can face flu season head on.
Visit michigan.gov/flu.
Many people are feeling overwhelmed and struggling with mental wellness these days. So be kind to your mind. Give yourself permission to breathe. Share your feelings. You are not alone. Have hope. Talk to a Stay Well counselor for free confidential help 24/7 through the COVID-19 hotline.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. You can always stay up to date with us on CivicCenterTV.com/Megacast, where you'll find all of our full shows and each segment on demand, and learn more information about each and every one of our partnering TV, radio, and streaming networks all across the state of Michigan and throughout Oakland County. Joining us now on the program is one of over 300 charities and nonprofits supported on the Share Detroit platform. Susan Rosas is the CEO of Holy Cross Services and joins us now on the program. Susan, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So first off, just give us a little bit of background information on your organization, its history, how long it's been serving the local community, and some of the services it provides.
Sure. Holy Cross has been around for 75 years. This is our 75th year anniversary. We started so long ago, as a tiny organization based in the Detroit area, we were serving 16 young boys who had nowhere to turn. And since then, we have developed and morphed over the years to address various needs across the state. And we are now a statewide organization. We have lots of different services now across the child welfare spectrum and across the homelessness spectrum. So we have cast our net much wider as we have identified more need across the state, and as the state has engaged us and communities have invited us to come support the needs in their communities.
And so you have services that are spread throughout 3 branches, if I'm correct. Tell us about those and some of those services that are then provided at those branches.
Sure. We have 3 operational arms, 2 of which fall within the child welfare sector. So one of our arms is the Family-Based Care and Youth Transition Division. And in this division, we offer a lot of services along the continuum of care for children who are based in community. So we do prevention work with families who are struggling to help prevent these kids from potentially entering into the child welfare system. The hope and goal for every family is that we can help them find healing before things get really, really tough and kids might engage with the system. So that's one area of work where we have rapidly expanded as that's been a priority for us and for the state. We also provide foster care services. So when children are removed by the state and placed into foster care, we work with foster families to help provide that temporary care to children so that families can heal and meet whatever criteria are necessary in order for the family to be reunified. We offer parent partner services, which are a number of advocates who were once parents who had their children removed from them, and then the children were safely reunified with them again. They were successful in safe reunification, and these individuals advocate in partnership with parents who are engaged in the system so that we can really support and advocate for parents to reunify with their kids as fast as possible, as successfully as possible. We also offer residential treatment programming. We have programs for kids who are older and haven't had the opportunity to reunify, who might be in independent living programs. These are residential group home type settings so that kids can gain independent living skills, get intensive support so that they are able to, once they become adults, transition successfully into adulthood and to be independent. And this division also offers adoption services. So for kids who are unable to reunify, we facilitate adoptions for kids in the program. So that's one very complex division that we offer. We also offer residential care and family healing as a division. And this is a program that is targeted specifically for kids who have very profound trauma histories, who the state has identified as being unsafe in the community. And so these kids come temporarily into our residential treatment program so that we can help these kids to find some healing, to stabilize some of the unsafe behaviors that they're experiencing as a result of their trauma so that we can get them right back to family as quickly as possible. And then we have our third division, which is our sheltering and community-based care division, which focuses on homelessness and helping folks to exit their episode of homelessness as quickly as possible and find permanent housing.
So you mentioned that in some cases that these individuals are coming to you from the state or being referred to you from the state, but in other cases, how are people finding Holy Cross services and ultimately getting in contact with you to tap into some of these resources that they might really need in their lives?
Sure. So in our child welfare sector, most of the referrals that come to us are through the state for families that might receive service. So typically, a family who has touched the system in some way, the state will refer them to us. And so for most of our prevention work, families might not be able to reach out to us directly for that immediate connection. However, for families who are already engaged in the system. So for if their children have been removed and are in the system and they really want that advocacy, they really want that support through a parent partner to help them successfully reunify with their kids, those families are welcome to reach out to us, and we can see if we're able to partner and help get them the support that they need. So in order for them to do that, anyone can visit our website at holycrossservices.org. And then for families and individuals, veterans who are experiencing homelessness, our homelessness services are centered in the greater Lansing region. And anybody is welcome just to come to our shelter or to call our shelter. And we will, if we have a bed available or if we can identify what kind of service is most useful for the individuals, we will refer them or connect them with our own services. Our community kitchen is open to anybody who's hungry and needs a meal. Our day center, the same. People can come in and use a computer or just rest or talk to a case manager. Anybody can walk in and use our services at Holy Cross in the greater Lansing area.
We have a couple more minutes with you, Susan, before we'll need to wrap things up today. And so I want to ask you, you cover a range of different services, and some of them do interconnect and some of them are just separate in their own right. But regardless of those connections or not, what do you wish more people knew about these services and about these different issues individually so that they can, contribute to helping in their communities with these issues, but also be as much of help to an organization like yours in providing these interventionary services and sometimes these really critical services that are needed to get families and individuals back on track?
That's a beautiful question, because I think one of the misconceptions about systems are I think just the word system makes people think of something that is cold and sterile and bureaucracy, when maybe bureaucracy exists, but it is a bureaucracy of people and hearts and community that are all working toward a particular mission to try to help families reunify and to try to help kids find a permanent loving family and to help people get back on their feet and end their episode of homelessness. And so when we talk about the system engagement, it's that acknowledgement that every one of us has a role to play in bettering our community. Every one of us has a role to play in being the best versions of ourselves and do right by our kids and do right by our communities. This is a collective effort. It takes a village. So I would say when it comes to how folks can contribute to organizations like Holy Cross, we would love to see listeners with your show to reach out to us for volunteer opportunities or to have the possibility to donate time or funds or items that kids might need or that folks within a shelter might need. We are always looking for foster families. If people are interested in caring for children, we will be opening more services because the need has just increased so significantly, especially around the Detroit area. So people who are interested in potentially working for Holy Cross, we'd love to hear from you. There are just a thousand ways, I think, for people to be a part of this system, which is really community and hearts and collective activism.
Well, Susan, we appreciate you being on the program with us and telling us more about your organization. And thank you, of course, for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
You can find more information also on the Share Detroit's website on sharedetroit.org and learn more about both Holy Cross Services and over 300 other charities and nonprofits across our local area. That will do it for today's edition of the Megacast. Of course, you can always follow along with us and keep up to date on civiccentertv.com/Megacast and join us Monday through Friday live from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. for our shows each and every week. Big thank you to our guests as well as our crew at the studios of My Michigan TV and Civic Center TV. Until next time, I'm Tyler Kieft. And until we see you again, take care of each other, and we'll be back very soon.